Just great helping me get set up. And of course my husband Dale, who I thought I could get all of my art for this exhibition in one car, but I had too much, so we had to take 2 cars over here. So thank you, Dale, for helping me get over here. Like many of you, you are probably fans of Laura Ingalls Wilder. I read her books when I was young, and also to my children, because I just loved Laura's spunky pioneer spirit, something that I could really relate to. And now that I've worked on this project, the Pioneer Girl Project, I can also relate to her as an artist. And what do I mean by an artist? An artist is someone who helps you see the world in a new way. And certainly Laura, in her Little House books, helps us to see the prairies in a new way through the eyes of a child. Her descriptions were part of the inspiration for these book covers, which I did. And if you remember in Laura's writing, she talks about how she sees out loud for her sister Mary. Pa encouraged her to tell Mary, who had become blind, what she saw in a very vivid way. And just like Laura seeing out loud, I too think of my artwork as helping others see out loud, only instead of using words and phrases and sentences, I use lines and shapes and colors and textures. So please come in. So tonight, what I'm going to do is I'd like to accomplish 3 things. The first is to talk about my journey as an artist. The second, to talk about my inspiration and process in working on the Pioneer Girl Project. And then lastly, just a few things I've learned as I've come to know Laura Ingalls Wilder in maybe a little bit more intimate way than when I read her children's books. So let's get started. First, I'll tell you about myself. I grew up in a suburb outside of Chicago. My father had a lumber yard, which is significant only in the fact that we lived in a commercial district, and so I really didn't have a neighborhood of kids to play in. You know, I couldn't really go outside and play until after the lumber yard was closed because there were trucks pulling in and people unloading material, etc. So I was perfectly content to be inside and draw. I loved to draw, spent countless hours doing that. The other thing I really enjoyed was hanging out with my dad, who loved the out of doors. And so I became interested in nature and the out of doors, as well as anything that had to do with drawing. Growing up outside of Chicago, I was fortunate enough to go to a high school that had an excellent art program. My high school had 2,000 students in it, and we had great facilities. And I would say most of the basics art that I learned kind of ancient history now, way back when I was in high school. When I graduated, I actually received a scholarship to continue with my art, but my parents, wanting me to thrive and not starve, didn't want me to go to art school. They wanted me to go to college and get some skills that would maybe suit me better as a career. So, being an obedient daughter, most of the time, I took their advice, went to college, got married, had a family, and didn't really do much with my art. Now, most of you, like me, I would say all of you, like me, have that creative desire, that creative implant in you. You know, I really feel that we're created in God's image, and what does He want us to do but to be creators ourselves? So, to nurture that. So all through my married life, you know, these little creative things would come out, but not to the extent of what I do now. So it wasn't until my kids started to leave for college, and I also happened to be out of work at the time, that I stopped to reevaluate what I was doing, and I thought, you know, I wonder if I can pick up my art interest again. So it sounds good, but it was kind of scary because it was years that I actually did any serious artwork. So I thumbed through the community college paper and discovered that they were offering a drawing class. So I went for it, I signed up, and that got me started. Actually, my son, who was in junior high at the time, actually went with me to give me a little courage, which I think they liked Scotty better than me at the time. But I became very good friends with my art instructor, who encouraged me to take painting. She mentored me, and that's how I got started in painting, which really wasn't that long ago. I'd say a little over 10 years ago is when I started painting. So once I decided that I was going to dedicate myself to learning how to paint again, what I did is I dedicated time and space. My girls were in college. I took over their bedroom, and my husband, he always laughs at the story, but when my kids called home, he said, now, you have to ask Mom about coming home because you don't have a bedroom anymore. And they thought he was joking, but sure enough, I kind of took over their bedroom. Their beds were still there, but I had all kinds of stuff stored down, and they were bunks, and took it over as a studio because I found having a dedicated space and time every day to work on my art really helped me progress with that. After I started painting a little bit, you show your art to people, and I go, oh, that's Judy, you should exhibit that. So I started to enter some competitions, and I did fairly well. Then I always called it putting on my brave shoes. I would go and show my work someplace else. Eventually, I was able to get into a gallery where they sold my artwork. But pretty soon, being in the Iowa landscape, I thought, I think I want some other landscapes for inspiration. So, I had heard that the national parks offer what are called artist residencies. And there's over 450 national parks and national monuments in the United States, and about 50 of them, approximately, offer artist in residence programs. So I looked into that and discovered that, Glacier National Park, the Grand Canyon, Yosemite, all these spectacular parks offer residencies, but they're very competitive to get into. So I thought, I wonder if there's something closer to home. So I looked around, and sure enough, I found one in Beatrice, Nebraska. Does anybody know what is in Beatrice, Nebraska? It is, do you?
Yeah, it's SAC Command. That's one of them, I think.
Yes, but this is with a national park. Well, that might be a national facility as well. It was the Homestead National Monument. And I had never heard of that before. So I looked into it and applied. It was the second year they offered the residency. So I thought two things. Well, it's the second year, probably not too many people have heard about it. Also, if you can go to Glacier National Park, who wants to go to the middle of Nebraska? So I thought my chances were pretty good that I would get that residency. And I did. So I was very, very thankful for it. And that really started my journey as an artist. I always loved the prairie, being here in the Midwest, but the Homestead National Monument really educated me in the life of the pioneers. Now, before the program started, there was something playing in the background. That was my story of my artwork at the Homestead National Monument. That site is where the very first homestead was created. When Abraham Lincoln signed the Homestead Act in 1862, Daniel Freeman was the first person to make a claim. And that is where his claim was, in Beatrice, Nebraska. He was home from the Civil War. He was at a New Year's Eve party, and he had the idea, hey, you know, January 1st, the homestead law is going into effect. He knocked on the door of the land agent at 12:01 or something in the morning, and he was the first one to file in the United States. So they say. So that is what that site is about. I really invite all of you to visit there because it's a fascinating story. There's lots of themes that come out of how our world, how the United States changed from those pioneering times. And I learned a lot. However, when I got in my car with all my art stuff to go to the monument, I got a little scared because I'm thinking, you know, I'm looking for new landscapes. Well, the further I get into Nebraska, it's like, it's pretty flat. You know, the horizon line, I mean, that seems like that would be a very tedious painting with one long horizon line, and there weren't very many structures, there were very few trees. I started to get worried. I had told the people at the monument that I would create a series of artwork. So not only was I supposed to make one painting, but I told them I would make lots of paintings. So, you know, I get there, and I was a little panicky, to be quite honest. I was there for 2 weeks. It was 104 degrees. It was in the middle of the summer. And I did some sketching outside. They have a little prairie area. But I also spent time in their museum and at the archives of Nebraska at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. Read a lot of accounts of homesteaders and developed a series of 12 paintings from that experience. And if you have time later, I have all the 12 paintings are here in miniature. These are signed limited edition prints, but those are what are going to be on exhibition at the Art Center here in town. So, the part of the deal of being in a national park is that you have to donate one of the paintings to the park's permanent collection. So that meant that Dale and I had to come back within a year to deliver the painting. And I still remember this. We were driving back, and I'm looking through my homestead information, and I was looking at the dates, and I realized that the following year was going to be the 150th anniversary of the signing of the Homestead Act by President Abraham Lincoln. It's like, ding, wow, that's kind of a big deal. So I remember taking my painting and handing it over to the ranger and saying, wow, did you know that next year is the 150th anniversary of the Homestead Act? And he looks at me and says, listen, lady, we've been planning this for 5 years. But for me, it was like a wake-up moment because I thought, wow, well, maybe my homestead series would be something that people would want to see because it helps interpret that time period. So I put my brave shoes on and I started to contact different venues, art museums, what would you call it, regular museums. And sure enough, they wanted my homestead series. So it started to tour, and it toured throughout throughout the Midwest. One of the places it wound up was in Pierre, South Dakota, which is the capital of South Dakota. They have a beautiful museum there. It's called the Cultural Center. And it was on exhibit for at least 2 months, between 2 and 3 months. During that time, I get a phone call out of the blue from this nice lady, and she introduced herself. She said, hi, my name is Nancy Copel, and I'm with the South Dakota Historical Society Press, and I was wondering if you would be interested in doing a book cover for us. And I thought, that sounds kind of interesting. I said, well, tell me about it. And she said, well, the book is Laura Ingalls Wilder's autobiography. So, you're kidding me. She goes, no, I like your artwork. I'd like to know if you would be interested in doing the cover. So after I, it's like, sure. So that started my relationship with the South Dakota Historical Society. And I worked with this lady, Nancy Copel, who I was a delight to work with. She is the director of the Pioneer Girl Project and the editor-in-chief of this project. But she is also very particular on what she wants on her books, in her books and on her books. So as soon as we started talking, she said, Judy, I like your artwork. I like how you depict the prairie. That's what I want on my book cover. But there's a few things you need to know. Number one, she goes, I do not like the color orange. Could you make sure that there is no orange in the painting? And I'm thinking, well, this is kind of weird. And she said, I looked at your artwork, and you know, after she said that, the more I look at my artwork, she said, it's really orange. So this is one of them, okay? So yes, this is orange. And she goes, yeah, she says, everything is orange. She goes, I don't want the orange. Can you do something without orange? Even this one had too much orange in it. You know, she's going on and on about the orange. Okay, orange is orange. This is the one that the monument decided to take it for the permanent collection, but it's orange. So I said, well, I'll see what I can do, but I said, I'll make it a cool, what's called in the art world, a cool palette. We won't use a lot of warms. I said, you have to remember, when I painted these, it was 104 degrees out, and I'm thinking these pioneers are out here in the heat of the summer without any shade. To me, orange was a very good color to depict what they were going through. So, the other thing she said was, being that we're the South Dakota Historical Press, we really would like Laura in South Dakota. So when Laura Ingalls Wilder came to South Dakota, she was a young teenager. So it's hard sometimes for us to think about that because the TV show shows Laura as a young girl, and they don't really tell you what town she's in. And a lot of people think it's South Dakota, but historically speaking, she didn't get to South Dakota until she was like 12 or 13 years old. So I needed to do a young teenager. And of course, they want everything to be historically correct in terms of clothing. We're talking the Historical Society, and they do their research very well. One of the things that they did is they gave me a picture to go by. So this is a picture of Laura here. I know it's shiny, you can come look at it later, but this is Laura right here, standing up. Mary is sitting down, she's blind at this point, and this is younger sister Carrie. But she's wearing a gingham dress, and you may not be able to see it very well from there, but she has what I call big hair. It's very curly and thick. So when I got the commission to do the book cover, I happened to be doing another artist residency, this time at Badlands National Park. And the deal was that I would create several sketches and they would choose which sketch that they would like. I don't think I had all the sketches. This is the sketch that I had come up with Laura in the grass with the big hair. So the sketch was approved and I started to draw. Now, on this book cover, they also, one of the stipulations was they wanted a portrait of Laura, but they didn't want a frontal view because nobody really knows what Laura Ingalls Wilder looked like at a young age. So they wanted to leave something to your imagination. So I turned her head, her profile, so that you couldn't quite see her face. You can tell it's a young girl, but you can't see her face. Well, that was really hard to draw. So I needed a model. So while I was out at the Badlands, there happened to be a ranger I kept seeing walking by. So finally I flagged her down and I asked her, Natalie, would you be willing to pose for me? I'm doing this book cover, blah, blah, blah. Would you sit for me so I could draw you? And she was more than happy to. So she sits, she takes her, you know, those big ranger hats, she takes it off and fluffs out her hair and she sits for the pose. I go, no, Natalie, you have to turn. No, Natalie, you've got to turn. So pretty soon she's like this. And she's like, what is wrong with this person? Because I only needed to get that very slight profile to get it right. And if you don't get it right, you notice it right away. So I delivered the painting. Everybody was thrilled. Soon they published the image. Once the book was going to be published, they did all of these blogs about the book, and they showed the cover image. It just so happened that I was at the office the day after they published the blog that had the picture of Laura Ingalls Wilder on it. And the director, Nancy Copel, said, "Now, Judy, when you read this, take it with a grain of salt." And sure enough, there was a huge controversy about the cover image. Anybody want to guess what it was about?
It looked too cool and this is fun.
Oh, you mean not enough orange? No, I wish. What do you think? What do you think might upset some people? Why they were a little upset
Because they
about the
couldn't see
cover
her
image?
face?
Pardon?
Because they couldn't see her face?
No.
Was it the water?
The water? No, because this is by the shores of Silver Lake, so that is why it is here. Oh, how did you bring that up? They wanted the shores of Silver Lake, so I finished the painting, and then Nancy goes, "You know, we really wanted the town in the picture." I was like, "Oh no!" Because if any of you have worked watercolor, you can't paint over watercolor like you can with oil or acrylic. But I was able to sneak it in here, so you can see it better on here. So I was able to sneak this on the horizon line, just a little image of the town. But it wasn't that.
Well, I don't know why anybody would be upset about that picture. 'Cause it's absolutely
Well, you
fabulous.
have to remember, these are people who follow Laura Ingalls Wilder and are very specific about historical details.
Your nose is wrong.
Because her hair was down?
Yes, that was part of it. It was, I call it now the hair controversy. Because people said, well, Laura would never have had her hair loose. It would have always been in a braid. And where's the bonnet? She should have a bonnet on.
Yeah, but
She
she
would,
always threw it
her
on.
nose would be burnt. Ma would never let her out of the house without her bonnet on, you know? She would never do that.
But they okayed the sketch.
But you were looking at the original picture.
In the photo, she's got her hair
Okay,
down.
well, actually, somebody had said that. They said, there has never been a picture with Laura with her hair loose. Nancy got right on a computer and blogged back and published this picture and said, aha, we caught you, yes. The blogger blogs back and says, well, that was a formal picture. If she was out on a prairie, she never would have had her hair down. So there was quite a bit of controversy back and forth about the picture. Why do you think I chose to paint her with her hair loose?
I like the window on your curtain.
Absolutely.
It was
How else
accent.
would you catch the
The wind.
feel of the prairie? When I'm outside in the grasses, what do you feel most? You feel that
Your hair
wind
blowing.
hitting your skin. You feel it through your hair. And that's what I wanted to capture, and through the grasses. I want to read to you a section of On the Shores of Silver Lake, which was part of my inspiration. This is Laura Ingalls Wilder writing in her Little House book. She writes, down the slope of the little hill below the little shanty, patches of wild crocus spread yellow and blue in the young grass. And everywhere the sheep sorrel unfurled its little pink lavender flowers above sleek clover-shaped leaves. From the grassy swell, she could see the town beyond to the north. Oh yeah, this is the town, not her shanty. All the rest of the whole enormous prairie was a green carpet flowered with spring blossoms. And that was part of the inspiration for that piece. After this was done, by the way, this book became really popular. Did anybody try to purchase this book when it first came out?
Bought it from the library.
Okay, the library had an in with the South Dakota Historical
I think there was a
Society.
delay, if I remember right.
They did not, they thought this book was an academic book. They did not, for scholars, they did not expect it to become a popular book. It actually turned out to be on the top 10 seller list of the New York Times listing for 2 weeks in a row. I don't know how many printings it has gone through. I think, I don't remember, but you couldn't get the book right away. Now, I can tell you if you've got the first or second edition, if you purchased the book, because when the book came out, of course, part of my contract is I get a couple of copies of the book for my own use. So what do I do right away is I open up to find my name, obviously, on the book jacket, and guess what? They forgot to put it on there. So I'm on the copyright page, but on the first edition of the book, they didn't have it on there. So I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to complain, and I didn't want to, I just didn't know what to do. So I waited, and sure enough, the second edition came out without my name on it. And because they were publishing these books, people were buying them so fast. So finally, I got my brave shoes on and called and said, I'm just letting you know that my name is not on the book jacket. I said, according to our contract, it should be on there. And the guy at the book place goes, oh, Judy, it's on there. I go, no, it's not. He goes, yes, it is. I go, no, it's not. So he pulls a copy of the book onto his desk, and he goes, oh, he says, we are so sorry. So the third edition on has my name, but if it doesn't have my name on the jacket, that's why. So whenever anybody asks me to do a book signing, I always make sure I sign the jacket, so I make sure it's on there. When that project was done, it was so popular, Nancy, reading the autobiography, discovered that she had a lot of questions about Laura's life. And that's what prompted to do the second book in the series, which is called Pioneer Girl Perspectives. And what this book is, it's about it's compiled of several essays that expand more of the issues of Laura. So for instance, they talk about women at that time period. And a variety of different things. It's very interesting. But if you notice, this book cover also had stipulations on it. No orange, if you can help it. Now this was hard because this one had to be summer. So summer, give me a break, summer's hot, right? What's a nice hot color would be orange. So I had to play down the orange a little bit. And at first they said they didn't want another frontal view of Laura, but what did I do? I put a great big bonnet on her head to keep all of the bonnet people together and to shade her face so you really can't see her face very well. So that was very intentional to add that. And I came up with several different sketches of what to do for the second one. The first one was very easy. I could just picture myself sitting in that prairie with the wind blowing and giving her a pad of paper, to symbolize her future life as an author. But for the second one, I had to come up with different sketches. So, first I thought this would be great. I don't know if any of you remember the straw story, where Laura gets in trouble with Pa because he is stacking a big straw stack. And Laura discovered that it's really fun to slide down the straw stack like a big slide. And Pa said, you can't do that, So they pile up all the straw, and she just can't resist. This time she gets Mary, come on Mary, to do it with her. And so she finally got in trouble because I think it was 3 or 4 times that she kept ruining a straw stack. But I thought, a little impish grin, wouldn't that be a fun painting to do? Problem, she was too young. She wasn't in South Dakota at the time. So then I thought if we do a profile view of her, of doing this one. I like this one too, but they did not. They rejected this one. And came up finally with this view right here that's currently on the book. Which was taken, actually. One of the staff members at the Historical Society, her grandmother, I think, or great-grandmother, had this old picture of doing hay. And so these little girls in here, they were just so darling. I thought this would be a really fun image. So I adapted this figure in particular to this one here, this one right here, to do the, to be the model for this image. Take a peek at these later. These are my drawings. So then the process goes, after they submit the drawing, then I play around with color. So I did give her a red dress, which kind of looks orange, but so I had to play around with palettes and see how I wanted to do her face, and then I laid out the book cover. This one is a different size. So I tried to lay it out carefully because I'm thinking they need to put copy here, the book title and whatnot. So I measured it, I called them, making sure we had the book size correct, that everything was done for when the book was actually done. But you just never know how things are going to turn out. So here is a print copy of the artwork, and this is the book cover. Now, what did they do? They what? They cropped her and they blew her up because they wanted it bigger. And what bothered me was they chopped the horses' heads off. So that took me a while to get over because I didn't get the book. And the first thing I noticed was the horses' heads were chopped off, and then I looked for my name. But the more I thought about it, it was like, well, you know, if I were looking at this book, I would turn it over to see if the rest of the horses were on the back. So maybe that's a good thing. So that's, I talked to Nancy just a couple of weeks ago. I had to meet her out in the Black Hills, and she said that she was very unhappy with the second book cover. She said, I should have paid more attention to the designer because she wanted more of a feel of that open prairie, because they also, this is the little shanty that they lived in. They kind of cut that off on the book cover. They did get the color very good, though. I mean, the color was very accurate, but still. So that was just a little bit interesting. One thing you should know is that there are going to be 4 books in the Pioneer Girl series. Spring, summer, winter, and fall. And I've already done the images for winter and fall. So I'm sworn to secrecy. I can't tell you what's on the cover, but just so you know that they will be coming, I think, in 2019 and 2020 is when they are. And what these books are going to be, again, this would be for the die-hard Laura Ingalls Wilder scholar, but they are taking her manuscripts from this book, all of the different revisions before it was published. This is very interesting. This is actually Laura Ingalls Wilder's actual autobiography. And when she wrote this, she was in her 60s. She tried to get it published numerous times, to magazines, mostly. Nobody was interested. There were so many people who had the same experience that she did that they didn't think people would be interested to read it. So she tried and tried to get her actual autobiography published, and it wasn't until 2014 that the South Dakota Historical Society dug it up out of the archives and published it. And this book then also is annotated. So if they talk about an individual, they find out where that individual lived. If they talk about a song, they give the history of the song. It's very detailed and very interesting. So when Laura was trying to get her book published, her daughter was an author, and she is the one who gave her the idea of maybe you should try writing for children. And that's what started her story as a children's author, which is extremely interesting. Okay, I told you about my journey. I told you a little bit about the making of these book covers. Do you have any questions so far? Yes?
I'm just curious if it's going to be a set, why the sizes are different? How did they decide?
You know, I'm not in any of those meetings.
No, I'm just curious.
But I think because the next book is going to be, I don't know if it's going to be annotated, but I think it's the same format as this one. This one is kind of just out there, that is further explaining some of the content of this. But it's not a manuscript like this one was. That's my guess. I'll ask her next time I see her.
Yeah,
That's
just if you're going to sell this as a box
because
set,
the
that's
next
not
two
gonna work
covers
very
are
well.
going to be large like this as well.
Okay.
Mhm.
Good questions.
Okay, now I want to just share a little bit about what I learned from my time with Laura. Because reading this book and working on the covers and rereading her children's books, you know, I felt a kindred spirit to Laura Ingalls Wilder. And she taught me quite a bit that I want to maybe encourage you as well. First of all, I think that you should encourage that creative spark that's in all of you. You know, it's really easy to squash that because art forms are not really celebrated in our culture, not like they used to be. And so if you have any interest in whether it's writing, I don't care if it's needlepoint, anything where woodworking where you can create, I would really like to encourage that in you. Even if you put it away like I did for, 30 years, what you have to lose is to explore that. With time, I think you develop some wisdom and possibly something to say to other people. I know Laura did when she started writing her children's books. And I think as an artist, you are much better able to figure out what you really want to express. And that has value. So don't devalue your ideas. I think that's very important to remember. Strive for excellence. If you need to take classes or whatever, as a visual artist, taking classes is great. The real test is when you go to a competition or if you try to sell your artwork, because people tell you right away what they think of your art, which is good, which is very good because then you can evaluate what you're doing. I have down here, be a pioneer and keep discovering. Laura didn't start her writing career until she was in her 60s. And as she went along, she learned, you read about her life, she learned how to hone her writing, how to make it marketable. She learned how to work with librarians and different entities to become successful. She was always trying new things. At first she was very dependent upon her daughter's input because she was a professional author, but soon she developed enough confidence that she was able to write on her own. So with all that said, I want you to be brave and courageous. Get out there and develop those creative tendencies that you have. You just never know. It was rather random that I got contacted by the South Dakota Historical Society Press. But what a blessing and an honor to work on that project. I want to read one last quote, and this is by Kurt Vonnegut, who is an American author. And he says, "To practice any art, no matter how well or how badly, is a way to make your soul grow." So do it. And I'd like to leave you with that. Just do it. Thank you.
Like to use, I've had one customer, I'm doing
Okay.
watercolor.
Okay.
I'm naive. But like elephant paper, I was told to use elephant paper for watercolor. Do you use that too?
Okay, the question was the materials that I use for watercolor. I do like to experiment with watercolor. So some of my things that I have done use different mediums combined with watercolor. But mostly I use watercolor and I use cotton rag paper, which comes in different textures, different weights, and what's called different sizing. And sizing is what they put on the paper to prevent the watercolor from disappearing. So you remember how in school, when you used the watercolor on a piece of paper and everything disappeared and got washed out? There was no sizing on the paper. So it's a little technical. Once you start playing around with different materials, you find out what you like, what effect it has on your work.
And the paints, what do you use on that too? The two.
Paints, there are different qualities of watercolor paints. There's a quality that's called artist watercolor, and that is watercolor that is highly pigmented. It has a very high concentration of the color in it. And so I use artist colors. The other colors are fine, but you just have to use more of them to get a really deep saturated color. But there's lots of good brands out there. Any other questions about anything? Yes?
You've done residencies with the national parks?
Yes.
How did that come about, or?
I had read about it in a magazine, an art magazine, and I went online and tried to find out more information, tried to get a listing of which parks had residencies. And many of the residencies have very strict stipulations. Some you can only go in the winter because they don't have room for you during their tourist season, for instance, or they're very isolated. They drop you off like in Alaska with an airplane or something, you know, and you're out there and they pick you up, you know. So you have to go through and see what their parameters are. Most of them, you are required to leave a piece of your artwork, and it can be visual art. There you can write music if they choose you to do that. You can be an author. When I was in the Badlands, they had an artist who did installation work out in the prairie. There was another one who did some kind of dance form that they were just dancing out there, and they recorded that as part of it. They wrote a symphony for the park's anniversary. So there's lots of different options for artists at the national parks. They also required that there was an educational component. So I had to do some speaking to a public like this, as well as at the Badlands I had to teach. So I went into schools out there, to reservation schools, and did some art teaching. So it was really a great experience. I really loved doing that.
And how long did each one last?
It depends. The one in Beatrice was 2 weeks. The one at the Badlands was a minimum of a month. And I was out to the Badlands several times as an artist.
Was it expensive then? Did you?
No, the park puts you up. They give you housing. But at the Badlands, you had like a little apartment. So, you know, I had to purchase my own food, but they were at my disposal in case I had questions or I needed a ranger to go with me or something. My job as an artist is to interpret that park environment any way I wanted to. So what they wanted to do is to free me up so I didn't have to worry about, you know, mundane things like you do at home. Although I still had to do laundry and cook, but it was your job was to interpret the park. I should mention my exhibition will be up at the Art Center until November 16th. And the series that is going to be up there, I think I mentioned before, is what started this Pioneer Girls. And these paintings I'm going to add to that exhibition because after all, Laura was the most famous South Dakota homesteader. So these two paintings will join that exhibition. And tomorrow afternoon, I will be at Art and Frame on Main. I will be there for a meet and greet, and I can do book signings if anybody has a copy of either of these two books. But if you want to come by and say hi, that would be great. I do have some work for sale there as well. I have prints if you want to see more of my artwork, they are for sale, but they're mostly for you just to see some of the variety of different kinds of cards. And if you have questions, I would be more than happy to answer them.
How much time do you spend painting each week, or daily, or?
Well, it's interesting you say that because, yeah, I have breakfast and then I try to keep studio hours and work. However, the more professional I get, the more bookwork there is. I mean, to try to contact galleries, to try to arrange different things. So I have less paint time. So I try to work around that. But it's all good. It's fun. I know many of you are artists, so if you want to talk shop afterwards, that's fine with me. So, well, thank you.
You're marvelous. Thank you.
First started painting, I would suppose, when I was a kid. But I didn't start painting professionally until I was older. And I would say that was about 12 years ago. Inspiration comes from a lot of different things. I think as an artist, you want to see the world a little bit differently, so you look at things differently. So I might be inspired by how the light hits an object, or I might be inspired by the gesture of a bird or a person that tells maybe more of a story than just a portrait. So it's hard to put your finger on, but there's something that just is something you want to capture. I have done lots of different subject matter. I do love landscapes. I love the feel of the wind, I love the grasses, I love the trees. I do like putting people in my paintings. People in paintings don't sell as well as just plain landscapes. So I have done more and more landscapes that are just landscapes. I supplement that with teaching. I teach watercolor classes and workshops. I also do some work with the South Dakota Arts Council, where I go into schools for a week as an artist in residence. So I do a variety of different kinds of artsy things. My work was being exhibited when somebody who was working on this book project saw my art and thought it would be just exactly what they wanted for their book covers. And that one book has now grown into 4 books with the same publishing house. But that has been my only publishing experience. I thought once people saw my book in the cover in a bookstore, I'd be getting phone calls, but not so much. I have art in several galleries at Lanesboro Arts in Lanesboro, Minnesota. I have art right here in Marshalltown at Art and Frame on Main. I also have art in Rapid City, South Dakota at Prairie Edge, and a gallery in Okoboji, Iowa called Summer Wind. Well, I just like to encourage people to try their hand at art as well. There's lots of good instructors, and also just to get out there and see art. Art is such a unique, wonderful expression that I just find really exciting. So I'd like to share that with others.